Hello, and welcome to the second episode of A Bihari in America. First of all, thank you for watching my first episode dedicated on everything about Bihar and a little bit about me. And I have received a few comments. They were all positive. So you guys are too kind and generous. So I really appreciate and thank you for that. Now, in this episode, I thought I'll digress a little and talk about a topic of interest which is dominating the news cycle all over the world. It's about a reciprocal tariff. I know the word is mouthful, and if I pronounce it incorrectly, bear with me and forgive me. But I do want to talk about what it is, how it impacts people, how it impacts country, and what US has just announced on 2nd of April in a very interconnected and globalized economy. How is it going to impact all of us? Now remember, before we get into the details of it, let's just bring this very highfalutin sounding topic down a notch. I'll define what tariff is, and then we'll go and talk about what has been the last 125, 30 years of the history of tariff and how the world has progressed, benefited or not because of it. So tariff is nothing but it's essentially the tax on the goods and services that countries levy to each other for the access to a wider market. For example, if India wants to sell something to US, we sell lots of fabrics, textile, etc. US says that okay, now if you want access to people with affordability to buy your textile, 350 million people, I'm going to charge you some money in addition to the cost of manufacturing, the price that you are charging, to have you access to my market, and vice versa. It is called, in other words, customs duty, import tax. In Hindi, it's called ayat shulk. But at the end of it, in a world that is becoming increasingly a global village, any time you mess with it, what potentially could happen? So let's go back. So I would start during the first half of 20th century as US was heading into Great Depression towards 1929, 1930s. Because of whatever the excesses of 20s, etc., I don't want to go into that. But as we got into that, there were two gentlemen in the Congress. Mr. Hawley and Smoot, they got together and created a protectionist trade policy called Hawley-Smoot Act. And what it did, it increased the import taxes to the tune of 60% on the foreign goods coming to US. Now they thought they were trying to protect our US workers. But the effect it had that it increased domestic prices for already suffering impoverished citizenry, which wasn't that great, right? So if you don't have money and something all of a sudden starts costing more, then it hurts your wallet immediately. So it deepened already worsening depression. Then in 1933, 44, a gentleman named Franklin D. Roosevelt, who came to power in the middle of depression, and he said oh, enough with that. And he immediately repealed Hawley-Smoot Act and started through the path of lowering tariff. Now, as we went from that point onwards, US started recovering slowly, and by the end of Second World War, we said like, okay, these terms which are lowering tariff and making freer movement of goods and services from one country to another, in 1947 came another agreement called GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. Now, that is the year that was not yesterday. I'm talking about something more than 80 years back, 85 years back, when India just became an independent country. And that led to the really high growth of broadly the economies of the world. Everybody started doing well to the point that US are like, okay, let's do a free trade agreement. Not with everybody, but some of the select countries, which was NAFTA in 1994. Now, that also had some great benefit. It also created some hardship in the areas of US which were dependent on factory, such as what is broadly known as the Rust Belt, primarily the areas of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio. They suffered. But I think like it was not because we created a free trade agreement, but we didn't think through how do we train the workers to alternate sources of employment. So we didn't do proper training, reskilling, etc., or wage insurance. So that really created pain to the point that these areas of the countries, which used to be solidly democratic, now they are very heavily Republican leaning. But remember, this was not the problem with the trade and tariff. It was the problem with how do you deal with the people who are going to be displaced and bring them into the areas which is going to win. The areas that won were the services, all kinds of services, to the point that now, by the end of like 2024, services accounts for 30% of US trade. Out of $3.2 trillion of trade, services is 1.1 trillion. Now, the point is, how do we take this goodness and spread it across the board? Not try to put the genie back into the bottle and reverse this juggernaut, which will cause massive disruption and it will hurt us ultimately more than it would hurt others, because most of the exports that we do from US can be substituted easily, except probably software and services, not at this point, but with the advent of AI and massive investment by some of the countries like China, etc., even that will become an alternate source. So it's not in our favor to enact these kind of policies. In what is in our favor is to create the proper economic incentive that moves people from one side to another. Talk about what has happened in the past will pale in the comparison what will happen with the advent of AI. And it is right here. These large language models, chatbots, are going to take away our jobs. But guess what? It will create some other type of jobs. So instead of preparing our workforce, preparing our world for the next onslaught, we are trying to go back and using these scare tactics, which never has worked. And people who are doing this, they are doing this such simplistic math, looking at like the countries, the trading balances. Hey, look, instead of creating very quick fix that you think is a fix, but it's not a fix, it's not a remedy, it's a malady. So why not take time? And if you think that like, hey, India, it's not fair that now you are no more like underdeveloped or just nascent developing industry. It's not fair that you charge 100% tariff on Harley Davidson, whereas we charge you 2.5%. If somebody wants to buy Lexus, why does it have to cost, instead of 50 lakhs, 1 crore in India? So these are the things that you can negotiate, and it is part of ongoing Commerce Department negotiation all the time. So do that to bring the fairness in the global trade, but not some draconian measure which is going to hurt you more than it is going to help you. So anyway, the time is limited, and I can take so much of your time. So thank you very much for patiently watching this, and look forward to your comment and wait for the next topic. Thank you. Bye-bye.